Welcome to Love for the Truth Radio, a program devoted to encouraging you to be a contender of the faith in an ever-changing church culture. On Love for the Truth Radio, we will discuss current issues and challenging views along with biblical truth that can affect our Christian worldview and how we live out our faith. And now, here's your host, Cindy Hartline.
Welcome to the program. Many would agree that we are living in unprecedented times. Nations are growing weak economically, including the U.S. Political systems seemingly are becoming more corrupt. The religious forefront is leading ecumenically, and culturally we are becoming more immoral as we move further away from God's commandments and statutes in our societies and churches alike. Well, with us to make sense of the crises we are in globally is John Loeffler. John is a 50-year veteran of broadcast news. He was the assistant editor at All New KCBS in San Francisco, the classical music director for Southern California PBS NPR stations, and KVCR TV-FM, and worked as operations manager at the PBS Network Satellite Distribution Center in Denver, Colorado. John Loeffler has hosted the Steel on Steel radio show for the past 25 years, a weekly news program and early warning service dedicated to connecting the dots in the area of economics, politics, and religion. Steel on Steel has always been a cutting-edge news program highlighting trends that many call impossible. John also co-hosts the weekly Financial Sense News Hour with Jim Puplava and hosts the popular 6640 program for Chuck Meisler. Welcome, John Loeffler. It's so good to have you back on the show with us today.
Well, like I always say, you can reserve judgment on that till after the show.
Okay. Well, I'm sure so much has transpired since then. John, on your show, Steel on Steel, you cover how unrelated global, cultural, religious, political, and economic trends connect. There's a lot going on right now in all those areas. How can we possibly connect all the dots? I don't know how you do it, but most of us know that there's a huge financial bubble ready to pop. At least that's what we're hearing. We see that the stock market is radically going up and down. It's giving us a scare. We have Christians talking about the Shemitah year, the blood moons, and how they land on the Jewish feast days. Many are, in fact, living in fear that something big is going to happen. I hear it all the time. And in our last conversation, you agreed that something big is going to happen, but you weren't sure what. So why don't we start with what you do know about the financial forefront, because many people are sitting on the edge of their seat waiting for some answers. Let's start with China. Give us some details on what's going on with China, how their economy affects us. I know you and I had a little bit of a conversation in reference to that.
Yeah. Well, we talk about economics, politics, and religion, and they're really hopelessly bound together, even in secular societies. They can't be separated. Mm-hmm. But when we go to China, remember, had all of these economic difficulties under Mao Zedong. They tried the Great Leap Forward, which became the Great Flop Forward,
Yes.
And all of these things. And finally, after Mao passed away and the new leadership came in, they recognized they were going to have to introduce a certain level of capitalism. So this is what they call in the West the third way. We're going to keep the capitalism and we're going to keep the communism all at the same time, which, of course, is ludicrous because it doesn't work. And they've been on a constant state of expansion in their economy. Mm-hmm. They've created a middle class, which is now benefiting from the boom. They have more access to markets and things. But as a result of that, remember, every market goes up and it goes down.
Yes.
We create bubbles that are generally created. Bubbles are almost specifically created by actions of the central bank.
Okay.
In printing more money, which generates some place for that money to go. In the early part of the first century here, it went into the housing market. In the 1990s, it went into the stock market. That money runs somewhere, and it expands to a certain point, and then everything collapses. Mm-hmm. And that's when we call the bubble burst. And markets just go through these cycles if they're fueled by funny money. So China was doing the same thing, because what was happening is they were fueling the expansion of their military with this economic robustness that they had been seeing? Well, of course, it tends to roll over, and so governments start to do things. Governments can't admit that things go in cycles and that there are booms and busts, and so they try to do their best to prevent the bust.
Yeah.
But we all knew the bubble burst was coming, and that's what happened a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And over here, immediately, the Apocalypse Now people began yelling, "The sky is falling, here it is, here she goes!" And then we said, no, this is the Chinese market, and when it affected our market, this was a market correction, which on Financial Sense we've been talking about, that it's due for a correction, because no bull market goes straight up and no bear market comes straight down, but bear markets come down twice as fast as bull markets go up.
Okay.
So it reminds you of riding your mountain bike to the top of a cliff and going off the cliff,
Right.
You go down faster than you came up.
That's true. So do you think we're going to go down faster even more, or do you think we're going to come up? Or, I mean, what usually happens?
No, we have another, this bull market has a ways to go.
Okay.
There are 3 stages to almost any bull market. The first stage is usually at the bottom, when really smart professional investors, like George Soros, by the way, who just poured a lot of money into coal. You have to admire the irony of that. He sees that this is at the bottom, and despite the fact that he promotes all these leftist causes, like some of the radical environmental stuff, he understands that Obama's days are limited, and Obama beat the price of coal down trying to run the business out of business. And if we have a Republican president, that's going to reverse, and the price of coal is going to go up.
Okay.
So he's jumping in at the bottom. Those are the shrewd investors. The second stage is when what you call the professional brokers and everybody else recognizes that something's happening, and they climb in.
Okay.
Now, the third stage, and this is the signal stage, is when everybody else on the street goes, wow, it's going up and up and up and up. We got to jump in. The sky's the limit. As soon as the street jumps in and thinks they're going to make $1 million overnight, that's when you'd better get out.
Okay.
Because that's the indication that things are going to roll over. So we're in stage 2 right now of this bull market, and barring rogue events from Europe or from China or from Japan, some of these things you can never predict, that's going to do that. So are we in a crisis right now? No, we're just continuing the phases that came out of the last crash.
That's interesting. So, I mean, you gave us a lot of information as to what's going on. How do we protect ourselves as a nation? I know I had asked you that question from this bubble bursting again. I mean, do you think there's a chance that this can continue happening? And I'm only saying this, John, because of the economical, crises that we have with the other nations right now. So
okay,
how do we protect ourselves?
You have a double answer, and it depends on how wide you zoom your lens out.
Okay.
All right. If you zoom out wide and you look at what's going on in Europe and China, that actually drives things into the dollar rather than out of the dollar.
Okay.
And so that's what's keeping us. The dollar right now is the best-looking house in a bad neighborhood.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
All of our currencies are in trouble. They're all like ships on a sinking ocean, and what people are doing is trying to stay afloat from jumping to ship to ship to ship to try to figure out which ship is closer to the water line and to get off of that one. So in the area of China, though, it's hard to now. The markets are interconnected, and we watched this during this whole Chinese meltdown and the meltdown of U.S. stocks and bonds and everything else that was going on, as we would be concerned, say, when the Hong Kong market opens up. It opens up when we're sleeping. We're going to bed when already the action's taking place, in Asia. There are people that are going to benefit and people that are going to lose. And it depends on understanding where you are. The most important thing anybody can do anymore, Cindy, is to understand, and I always say pray first because God has answers for your life.
That's right.
He understands your situation. Understanding what's happening allows you to take the appropriate action.
That's right.
Where the panic comes in is where people don't understand what's happening.
That's right,
And
because they get blindsided or it hits them the last minute and there's nothing they can do about their situation. Okay,
right, and a lot of people... Go ahead.
Yeah, so should we, as individuals, how do we protect ourselves, now and in the future?
Okay, well, if you understand what's happening, and here are the possibilities, uno, dos, tres, so to speak.
Okay.
We were talking about the Shemitah year, and people worried about the blood moon. Now, we've had 3, and we're coming up on 4. That's the 4th and the last one of the 2 years of concurrent 4 blood moons during Passover and Tabernacles. And people are, buzzing about that. Well, in October, September, that's when the markets always go loopy anyway.
Right.
There's just certain cyclical things.
Okay.
But in those things are sort of incidental. I don't put a lot of weight on them. They're nice to look at and say, yes, when these things happen, either God allows it or just it happens by happenstance or cycles. These other things happen. You understand that all of the currencies of the world are in trouble. The currencies are what are driving the markets. There's hardly a place in any U.S. market where our government or Federal Reserve doesn't have its hands jerking and pulling on the levers.
Right, that's right.
Okay. So, having said that, we know that there are going to be some crises ahead. It could come 3 different ways. The first one is the apocalypse now. Let's grab our God, guns, gold, and groceries and run for the hills and make sure you've got about 6,000 rounds of ammo.
Right.
Okay, and we're going to hold on.
A lot of people are doing that. Okay.
I don't think that's going to happen. And by the way, I'm an advocate of being prepared for emergencies.
Yeah.
Okay, I believe that.
And I think we should. Yep.
Okay, the second one is, and this is the most likely one, is that we will go through this series of booms and busts for a while, and they'll be faster and more intense each time as all these little crises come running around until it finally seems like all sorts of stuff is going on, and then everybody gets all upset. And the way that happens is politicians may try to get involved. They may try to pass laws to keep it from happening again, yada, yada, yada. The third stage, and this is what's been going on in Japan, the third possibility, and we've never been here as a world before because you asked, how can we defend ourselves from what's going on in China or Europe and what? And the answer is, you can.
That's right. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's the scary part.
We are all locked together. And governments, here's why is it we have not really recovered from the crash back in 2007-8?
I think that's the big question. That's the big question.
We have not allowed the debt and the bad money to blow off, to take our losses and take our hits, and then recover. And once we do, economies are very strong. But governments and politicians can't tell people that. They can't say, well, there aren't going to be any jobs for the next 24 months. Sorry.
Yeah.
And so what they do with the central bank is they start pulling on levers and blowing whistles and doing everything they can to keep it going. But it's like an illness where the doctor says, you have to do this, you have to go through this purge. It's going to be very difficult, like an addiction. But when you come off of it, you'll be a strong person. They can't do that. And so what they do is they keep trying to keep them going for years by giving them more doses of what got them into the trouble in the first place.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's the Japanese effect. That's where they are. They have been in a moribund economy for almost 2 decades now. And the odds are the world has never been out here before. We have been to this point before on the ocean where we understand how inflation causes booms and busts.
Right.
But we've never been to the point where people understood that mechanism enough and then tried to prevent it. And that's what's going on with the European Central Bank, our bank, the Bank of England, Japanese Bank, Central Bank, all of these banks. They're trying to keep the game going. That's the game. So everything's on a time clock.
Right. And I think that's the scary part, John. I mean, we look at Greece. It's in bad shape. And now we see millions of refugees leaving Syria and infiltrating Europe. These people haven't had food. They've walked for miles just to get out of Syria. Now, we look at that, just those two. First of all, what is the latest news on them? And is their economical situation a warning to us? We're going on a break right now, so we'll be back with John Loeffler to talk about the economical situation and then to move forward with the political forefront. So please stay tuned.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
If you're a first-time listener, you'll find that on Love for the Truth Radio, we discuss news and views through a biblical worldview. We believe that the Bible is the inherent Word of God and the absolute truth that should be applied to every aspect of life. We don't proclaim to have a cap on the truth, but we do have a love for biblical truth. So please take everything you hear on this radio show to study and prayer. And thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio.
You just tuned in. Our guest is John Loeffler, host of Steel on Steel, a weekly news program and early morning service dedicated to connecting the dots in the areas of economics, politics, and religion. John is going to connect some events for us, and we're going to continue on the economical forefront. We were talking, John, about Greece, the bad shape that it's in, and now Syria leaving their country and infiltrating Europe. They're in a bad economical situation. Is this a warning to us? Are we headed in the same direction as America?
Yeah, everybody's headed in the same direction. We have, or when President Obama leaves office in another, 500 some odd days, he will be at $20 trillion in debt. And as I mentioned before, we've never been out in waters like this. Now, the blow-off could either be catastrophic, or we could try to get rid of it slowly. That's going to be painful. Or we could try to just keep the whole thing going for as long as we can. And like I said, it's uncharted waters. The same thing for the European Union. And if you look at the way everything connects together, look at the Middle East. Let me show you how this works. Okay, Iran, Iraq, lots of oil. The Middle East is the world's gas station. And unfortunately right now it's a gas station where everybody's running around throwing matches. Okay. If the Middle East were not the world's gas station, the rest of the world wouldn't care. They'd draw a big line around it, put up a big fence, and say, you guys slug it out. It's like the Hunger Games. You slug it out. Whoever comes out will appoint them the ruler of the new country, but we don't care because all you've got to sell is sand.
That's right. Yeah.
All right, and we're not interested in sand. But because they have oil, and because for the next 20 to 40 years, fossil fuels, despite all of the claims about global warming advocates, is still going to be the primary fuel of the future. Until we come up with substitutes, and they're not on the horizon. Okay, they're not really as far as being commercially viable. So that's connected to the economy there, which then relates to the dollar as the world's currency that settles it. So on one side you have a civil war going inside of Islam between the Sunnis and the Shias. You've got an ideological war of ISIS, the hardcore Shiites, against the West and the little Satan and the great Satan, and that's just on the basis of Islamic ideology. And connected with that are the currency wars, as people are trying to topple the dollar as being the primary reserve currency of the world. But at the very same time, there's nothing to replace it.
That's right.
So they're trying to pull it down, and they thought the euro might do it. Well, the euro is sick right now. You know, it's not going anywhere.
That's right.
So that's how that ties in. Now, because of that ideological fight, and what the Western media have ignored for so long, which has been the genocide of Christians throughout the Middle East, all the way from Nigeria through Sudan, Egypt, Syria, Iran, Iraq, all of these countries. Now you have hordes of people fleeing the horrible economic results and the fear of being beheaded or burned alive or whatever it is ISIS is doing. And so now Europe is having hordes of people drench its shores. At the very same time, it's not in the best economic shape.
That's right. Gee, I wonder what's going to happen there,
And you need money to do it. Plus, the Europeans have figured out, wait a minute, all these people are Muslims from a different culture. This is going to be totally disruptive to our culture.
That's right. That's right.
How many ISIS agents are coming in with all the refugees into Hungary? Did you see the pictures this week from Hungary about the man and the woman on the railroad track with the baby trying to escape from people, and the dead child that washed up on the shore of Europe, one of the immigrants. I mean, it just tears your heart out. Europe's all a buzz about it right now. So that lapses in. But remember, Europe started this experiment, didn't it? It started this experiment to have a unified Europe. Let's have a socialist government. We can make it a secular government, a godless government, and we can welcome all these Gastarbeiter in. These were the guest workers. Why? Because they promised somebody something for nothing. And when governments start to promise you something for nothing, somebody else has to pay for it.
Well, we have that in the United States right now with immigration. It's the same thing going on. I mean, same kind of scenario, maybe not as many people, but it's like, how can we afford everyone that's coming in through the borders. And with that in mind, John, why don't we move over to the political forefront, because I think a lot of eyes right now are on the candidates for presidency, and the polls are actually showing, I think they are anyway, that the U.S. politically has gone terribly wrong. It seems like people don't want to hear the politicians anymore. So we have Trump who raises up here his voice, and it seems like it's exactly what the people have on their hearts. It's just what they want to say. He seems to be the voice that's raised up right now. What do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I usually stay out of silly season. Okay. Silly season is the time when we start talking about electing a president and everything.
Yeah.
But I will say this much. Donald Trump, as brash and likable or unlikable as you might think him, has indeed voiced the thoughts of a lot of people. The most primary one being, we are tired of being told to shut up.
That's right, yeah.
That our views don't count. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that he has done in opening up what he's been saying, because people are tired of saying, well, we have a problem with, say we talk about violence in the inner city. Well, you're a racist.
All right.
You can't deal with anything intelligently using cliches. People are, I call it, barf sick of it.
Yeah.
All right. They just don't want that anymore.
Right. Exactly.
I have told Christians, now is the time for you to say, I will not sit down. I will not shut up. Mm-hmm. We are going to promote what we believe to be a good worldview for the country, and if you don't like it, well, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But that's what I believe, and I have the right to say it.
No, I think we need more people to stand up, because they're not. And that's why we're in the situation that we are. I think the church has been silent for a long time. We need the leaders. We need the pastors to take a stand. That's exactly, I think, what the people want to hear. It seems that they don't want politicians anymore. Doesn't it seem that way to you?
Right, but understand that Washington is a system that runs on its own drum.
Yeah,
they're only interested in us for two things. That is to have a source of money, and every 2 years when we have to vote on something.
That's right. No, you're right about that. Anyway, all right, well, let's get back to the immigration problem. I know that you had shared with me a story that your friend had gone through as immigrants. What's going on in that area, and why is it a huge problem for us?
It's a huge problem because we allowed it to get out of control. Mm-hmm. And the friend that I was talking about he's Canadian, his wife's American. They've been living in Canada for the last 15 years, and they decided they wanted to move here. And just watching what he had to go through to get his green card. Now, bear in mind, they have 7 kids. They've been married for, almost 20 years. It's not like this is anything new or marriage of convenience. And so he kept coming down to the deadline when your 6-month time expires. Canadians can come here for 6 months. We can go there for 6 months with no visa.
Right.
Okay. And he was at the point of having to go back to Canada, and even though they bought a house here and the family was here and everything, because the green card hadn't arrived. So I finally said to him, I'll just say, friend, I have an idea. Why don't you drive to Vancouver, fly to Tijuana, and walk across the border? It works.
Yes. Okay. That's sad, though.
And ironically, I talked to an immigration attorney who one of his clients did just that.
Oh, my goodness. See?
And he wasn't Hispanic.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about.
And so when this friend of mine finally had to go through his final interview, he had to fly all the way from the west coast of Canada to Montreal, Quebec on the East Coast just to have a 5-minute interview with our State Department, because our State Department doesn't have an office in Vancouver on the West Coast.
That's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. I go, what are we paying all these taxes for?
Yeah, well, it makes it difficult to do the right thing. See, that's the problem. You have the people who want to do the right thing, walk uprightly and according to the law, and they make it very difficult. But yet, you can just walk across the borders down south. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, and not only that, you need to understand that ISIS is planning on doing very bad things to us. And they are looking very carefully at what Hamas has done in digging tunnels from Gaza into Israel. There were over 40 tunnels that Hamas dug into Israel, into populated areas, parks and other places where they intended to come up and wreak havoc and take kidnap victims and blow things up. It's only a matter of time before a large number of them will walk across our borders and do something very bad to a city or cities in the United States. That's only a matter of time, given the security situation. So the first one is our own immigration policy. The second is the fate of the poor people who come here, because you can't blame them for wanting to get a better life. Frankly, Cindy, given our Social Security circumstance, just like guest workers, we've got to have them here or we can't maintain our Social Security. Okay, because this thing is going to go bust as well. And then the fourth thing is the security issue. I ran into a young man, and we have a big art fair here every year, and I started talking with this person who was selling insurance, and I said, well, you're rather young. Have you always done this? He said, no, I was the Border Patrol agent for 5 years. And I thought, well, this is a great time for an interview, right?
Yeah, great.
And I said, well, why did you stop? He said, I can't do my job because of all the politics, because of the politicos. And he said, when they finally had us changing diapers on immigrant babies, he said, I decided that was it. I didn't sign up for this nonsense. And so we're in trouble.
Yeah, we're in big trouble.
And this has, but every country goes through this 4-stage cycle where it has to come and reform. And I really believe that the key, I know you saved this for one of your last questions here, the key for the future is going to be you and I and everybody else doing little things for other little people. Little people doing things for little people is what is going to make this work.
Okay, give us a practical example.
Well, okay, here's an example. We maintain a page on Facebook called Praying for Persecuted Christians. About 5 months ago, we became aware of a man who'd been on our site who was a Pakistani pastor. He had been accused of blasphemy. You remember that in Pakistan? That's a capital offense.
Yeah.
And it hadn't been formalized at that point, but even he was being threatened just with being killed by his neighbors. So we fled the country to Thailand. Unfortunately, he's an illegal there. He was, because his visa expired, and the Thai police are running around rounding up Pakistani Christians to deport them back to Pakistan.
Oh, no. Oh, geez.
So what we did is we raised enough money through our show and our church to process legal documents to give him a longer-term visa so he could stay there until we could figure out what our next move was.
That's great.
That's a little person doing. We are providing, our listeners are provided monthly support for him. That includes room and board and food for him and his family. But there are other families he's invited over for dinner because they don't have any food. So we're providing that food. He's providing it over here. It's each of us doing something and passing it on. Most important thing is, I don't care what government says about what we're supposed to be doing, is for us to understand what is happening and to do whatever's done to deal with it for our own lives and for those around us.
Yes. Now, John, if people want to support that effort, how can they get in touch with you?
Well, we have a website, steelonsteel.com. If they want to become subscribers, they can use the promo code SOS50. It's normally by subscription. But if you want to help support the pastor right now until we can get him stabilized either in the U.S. and Canada, we have a link there, Support Pastor X. We just refer to him as Pastor X right now. And that'll take them to Candlelight Fellowship's webpage, and they're collecting the money so it's tax deductible. And we found a way to transfer the funds with no banking fee.
Many would agree that we are living in unprecedented times. Grave immorality is on the rise, as in the days of Noah and Sodom and Gomorrah. There are wars and rumors of wars as nations rise against nations. Prophecy is being fulfilled as the birth pangs become quicker and harder. These are the signs of the return of Jesus Christ. There is one sign often left untaught. Jesus also told the disciples in the Olivet Discourse to take heed that no man deceive you. This warning applies to us too. Deception has infiltrated the churches through many false teachings and movements, making apostasy paramount. As contenders of the faith, we do our best to research and discuss these false teachings for you, the listener. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
Welcome back. John Loeffler, host of Steel on Steel, is with us to discuss what's going on in the religious forefront. I believe all eyes are on the Pope coming to the U.S. and meeting with President Obama. In our last show, John, We did talk about how Pope Francis made his religious rounds. Remember, he was meeting up with Kenneth Copeland, the Robesons, Joel Osteen, Rick Warren, and the famous charismatic leader of Greece, I remember you telling me, and publishing certain particular agendas. So, but what is going on right now? What is he up to? Let's talk about Pope Francis.
He's looking for a good pizza. He said that's one of the things that he really regrets, that when he was in Buenos Aires, he could always stop off at this pizza place he liked and get a good pizza. He said, now I can't do that. So. You have to understand that Pope Francis, first of all, he's a Jesuit. Jesuits were one of the orders, along with the Maryknollers, who were responsible for spreading liberation theology throughout Latin America. Mm-hmm. They weren't the only religious orders, but they were sure biggies in the whole thing. Okay. And he grew up in Buenos Aires. He was a young man during the time of the Perones that were there, Eva Perón. And so he understands it. He understands the grinding poverty that is Latin America. Latin America has always had a problem in that it either jumps into crony capitalism, meaning, there's an upper crust and they all play this game to stay in power with the people who associate with them, or they seem to try to find some form of Marxism, and they keep ricocheting back and forth between the two, and they can never get it right. Okay. And more ink has been spilled in Spanish in Latin America by academics trying to analyze why that is. Right. That's why we have this horde of people coming our way. So I'm troubled. I like the man. I've always liked him since day one. I'm very troubled by his views about economics. I think his views of sustainability are equally troubling, because when you read parts of Laudato Si, I've read about a third of the papal encyclica. It's pretty long. And a lot of it's almost boilerplate language right out of the United Nations Agenda 21, now to be Agenda 2030, coming up at this little clam bake we're having in New York at the end of the month. This is a plan for the complete transformation and remake of the world political and economic system.
That's scary.
Basically, a world government of sorts. Of sorts is an important term in there. And the Pope seems to be going along with this. He obviously has bought into the idea of anthropogenic global warming.
Yes.
And I'm sure that he will have bought into most of the 17 points that are going to be brought up at the 2030 conference in New York. I think it starts September 25th, as I recall. So that's why I'm troubled. I'm troubled by his advisors. One of his chief advisors, one of the top six, is Cardinal Oscar Madariaga from Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Madariaga hates capitalism, thinks socialism is the way to go for everything else. He is anti-Semitic. He is anti-Israeli. You look at people such as his science advisor, the German Professor Schellenhuber, who is an atheist, much more of a pantheist, and believes that we need a global government system to basically save the planet and run everything. So these are some of the people the Pope is looking toward for input, and so that's why his policies are troubling for me. Now, on the other side, he has said some really reconciliatory things to a lot of people, and the Catholic Church has taken a long time to do that. They always walk around, and I say this with deference to my Catholic friends, we're the one true church, but they never remember to apologize to all the people they've stomped on, especially the Catholics that left. I don't think they understand that half the time, why so many people have left Catholicism. And I think the church itself is in a crisis, because when the Pope writes a papal encyclical, this carries a heavy weight of moral teaching. It is not pronounced infallibly. It's not ex cathedra, but nevertheless, very much like Humane Vitae, that was Pope Paul VI's encyclical that prohibited Catholics from using artificial contraception. The faithful are expected to obey that and observe that. So there are a lot of true traditionalists, really faithful Catholics who believe in the old church, so to speak, that are very upset by what they see happening. On the other hand, he has made some very interesting reconciliatory statements. First of all, acknowledging that Protestants are even Christians. Okay, that was a start. And he made a very good comment that I thought. He said, well, when he was talking about persecution, whether we're Orthodox or whether we're Catholic, or whether we're Protestant, we're all Christians. He said if we wait until the theologians get it right, it'll be the day after the Christ comes back.
All right, all right.
So he said, and to a certain degree, I tend to agree with that. So that was a positive remark on his part. I'm bothered, and I know Malachi Martin was bothered by this prior to his death back in 1999, as I recall, when he wrote the books Windswept House and The Keys of This Blood and the Jesuits and the Betrayal of the Roman Catholic Church as far as being an old Jesuit.
Yes.
And I posed to him a question. I said, Malachi, what's going to happen if some new pontiff comes along and they gut the Catholic Church of everything that is Catholic or even Christian, but you have this global superstructure and appearance of being a church, and they steer the whole world in an entirely new direction? And Malachi at that time said that was his worst nightmare. And the judge is out, the jury's out, but I'm beginning to think that that's the direction we're heading, and that's going to create a crisis for real faithful Catholics. The left wing of the Catholic Church doesn't have much trouble with that. They've been busy rebelling against the Vatican for the last 40 years, you know. And unfortunately, that includes most of the bishops in the United States.
It just seems like it's the perfect setup, John, for a one-world faith to me. I mean, it just seems like between his social views and his push towards working with global warming, and working, and embracing like technocracy and Agenda 21, and now this new agenda. It just seems like all of this is coming together to create a perfect scenario for him being a voice towards a one world faith / government.
Right, at least a one world linked system. You're right.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That is a real high-level possibility right here. And you have to ask what his priorities are. He doesn't talk about persecution a lot. Here you have an ongoing genocide of Christians in the Middle East. They're crying out, why is it the West and other parts of the Christian world don't pay attention and try to help us? You would think he'd use the bully pulpit there, pardon the pun, to promote the care of these people and the rescue of these people. If you talk to people like Juliana Taimurazi from Iraqi Christian Relief, she said these people are the Iraqis that have fled. They're Chaldean Catholics. It means they're a separate rite with inside Roman Catholicism. And they have fled. They're in camps right now. Their interviews with the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, is not until 2020, some of these. So they're non-persons for another 5 years.
Wow.
And the Vatican could use its efforts to speed this up. And whereas you have little people like Sister Houtain, I think her name was Houtain, I have to look it up, from the Houtain Foundation. She's an Syrian Orthodox nun, and she's running around rescuing Yazidi women from ISIS and stuff. And they're not even Christian. But one person doing something, remember what I said before, little people is going to be the important wave of the future.
Things. You know, the Pope is coming to America. In fact, he's having a meeting at Philadelphia, I believe at the end of the month. And I thought it was to come to talk about family matters. I believe that was one of his missions. But he's also promoting climate change, too. And, you know, basically he says if we don't comply, it's immoral. I mean, is this true what I'm hearing? That it becomes a moral issue if we don't comply to the whole climate change agenda?
Well, here's the theory. We're having terrible climate change. Theoretically, it's due to human activity, notably the introduction of carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. And therefore, since the planet's heating up, it'll be bad for the poor people of the world. And if we cause it and don't do something about it, it will be immoral. That's the logic chain.
Okay. I wasn't understanding that at first, but
boy, there's a lot of if-thens tied to that.
There is a lot.
You know, it's like if we have global warming and if we can do something about it, and if we can do something about it without wrecking the global economy and affecting the poor, which is really questionable, then maybe we should take a look at it. What really bothers me is he's elevating this to a level now of theology and morality. Now, believe it or not, I believe we should take care of the planet. That this is the home as long as we're here.
Sure.
Look, it started it started from God creating the planet. If you believe in the Big Bang, fine. even if there were no God, we're going to go to a heat death at some time in the future, so nothing is permanent here. But while we're here, let's take care of it. And I do believe in that. You know, we have 5 acres where I live, and I live on 1 acre. The animals get 4. And I can tell they're there because of all the poop.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we should, to give glory to God. You know, we don't worship the creature or the creation more than the Creator. Although in the last days, that's what the Bible says will take place, is that we'll worship the creature more than the Creator. I'm getting all tongue twisted here.
Yeah.
But anyway, looking at Pope Francis here, you know, is this a sign of his ecumenical Marxist kind of side showing? I mean, he is very ecumenical. And he does have that Marxist, you know, view from where he comes from. But, you know, just to look at him supporting sustainable development and technocracy, like I mentioned before, this is troubling to me. What are your thoughts on that?
Understand the concepts of sustainable development were birthed not in science, but in pantheism.
Okay.
Now,
there we go.
There's a scientific side to it. But if you remember back at the UNCED conference in 1992, I called this a giant pantheistic clam bake down in Rio de Janeiro.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
Because you had all these people were talking about Gaia and Gaia worship, and this is Mother Earth and all of this other sort of stuff. And we're going to take care of Mother Earth because we're hurting Mother Earth. And that's even Schellenhuber believes. I believe that the Earth is a big living organism, and we're wrecking the organism, and that's what's really bad. Now, he is marrying here, then, Roman Catholic theology with pantheistic theology. That's the danger on the theological side of the issue.
That's exactly it. And like I said before, it just seems like I'm seeing a setting of the stage here with Pope Francis. He has a big voice, and governs a lot of people. A lot of people look up to him. And I think we're in trouble. I really do. What do you think? Let's just talk about this. What else do you see connecting the dots with Pope Francis and what he's doing right now? What else do you see, particularly in the religious forefront, that might connect with what he's doing?
He's connecting more and more with people whose doctrine in evangelicalism and Pentecostalism is somewhat questionable.
Right, exactly.
And so you see this linking between Roman Catholicism, at least the official church. I'm not talking about the pockets of conservative Catholics and others who might disagree with what they're doing. With, say, the Rick Warren, the emergent church crowd, and with some of the more liberal denominations here in this country. The danger now is that the people who are biblical Christians or even Orthodox Catholics are being shoved to the side.
We're going on a break, so please stay with us. We'll be back with John Loeffler.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, we read that men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, without self-control, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. They will be ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Thank you for having a love for the truth.
Welcome back. This is Cindy Hartline, your host. John Loeffler is with us today. And in this segment, we will be discussing the cultural issues that are pushing us over the edge. But first, John, I'd like you to wrap up what you didn't finish on segment 3, particularly on Pope Francis.
Well, I think what's happening is that the sheep are going to be separated from the goats as far as what Christianity is all about, because as we go forward now, it will begin to cost Christians more and more to be a Christian. You won't be able to just say, "Oh, I'm a Christian," and then go about your life.
That's right.
There may be things that demand of you job-wise, imprisonment, money-wise. I don't know. And the real question we're facing in the country, now that's mocked when you say it, but the real question is whether or not Christians will able to be continuing to be Christians in the future, at least publicly. And it's a rather radical shift. And the forefront of that happens to be same-sex marriage right now, but it doesn't have to stop there. It's also involved in Obamacare, and Obamacare trying to coerce largely Catholic institutions, but some Protestant institutions, into paying for insurance for abortions and contraception in the case of the Catholic Church. And the idea of forcing someone against their will to do something that's repugnant to them is repugnant in and of itself, because we argued against that at Nuremberg. Remember that after the World War II, the Nazis just said, we were just following orders, you can't prosecute us, this was legal. So we didn't buy it then, but now we're insisting on it now.
Yeah, same thing.
So we don't, that's what I think the danger we're headed into.
Yeah, and everyone, I believe everyone listening to this show would say, gee, immorality is on the rise in America. It seems that it has gotten worse, and we did talk about that in our last show, John. Now, I know the highlight has been recently that the Supreme Court ruling in favor of same-sex marriage, like you just mentioned, was basically the last straw in saying that we do not want God in our nation. We took him out of our schools, out of our courtrooms, and now we are saying we want to view marriage our own way. And oh, by the way, we will decide what gender we want to be. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you can't have an increase of immorality where there are no morals. And we have rejected the whole concept of the morality as God would see it. We did that starting with the sexual revolution in the 1960s, Yeah. I tell people that are now just waking up to this whole same-sex marriage issue, didn't you see this coming? Where have you been?
Yeah.
You could see this all along. Now, we were talking about things like this 25 years ago on my show, but you try to get pastors interested, oh, that would never happen. It'll never go there. They won't allow that to happen. I even had arguments like that with John Ashcroft.
Yeah.
So that's it. So first of all, you don't have a morality system where everything is unified. Since we don't have a morality system that is common to the culture, anything goes as soon as you put it in law. And Christians will parade around saying, well, marriage is a marriage between one man and one woman. And I say, no, it's not. It's anything the state says it is. Now, maybe in front of God it's one man and one woman, but as far as the state's concerned, it's anything they make it.
That's right. Okay?
Yeah. And so you can't use that argument anymore because you let go 40 years ago. Okay, and once you did, you then surrender your rights to do anything else. Once you allowed government to become involved in the institution of marriage, you can't complain because it's not going the way that you want it to.
That's right.
But on the other hand, Cindy, I'll be honest, I don't care how many, say, men get married with each other. It doesn't affect my marriage.
But you know what, John, it does affect our, if you have grandchildren that are going to school and the educational system has changed in their views on marriage, and now they're telling the kids today they can be 17. I think the last I saw was 17 to 21 different genders, and they can decide what they want to be. It does affect us. I know that we should have stood up, maybe the Christians, but you know what? We were at one time a Judeo-Christian nation where our courtrooms abided by the Ten Commandments, and we did have the premise and the foundation of Christianity. I think it did begin to slip away, and I think we didn't see it. We saw it, but we didn't know how much it was going to affect us. Like in, 1963 when prayer was taken out of school. Let me tell you this. I went to a public school, and in up to third grade, we took our Bibles to school. We read the Ten Commandments off of the bulletin boards. We prayed the Lord's Prayer. We raised our hand and asked for specific prayers amongst the kids, and they were only third graders. And I'll never forget the day when my teacher came in and said, oh, by the way, kids, I hate to tell you this, but we're not allowed to talk about God anymore. It was not just taking prayer out of school. It took everything about God out of school. And I remember as third graders, we sat and we wept. Our faces were in the desks. Can you imagine third graders today doing that? We wept, we cried, we couldn't believe it. So they gave us like a few minutes of just silence from that point on. But yes, it changed everything. And you're right, it happened back in the 60s. It happened, it happened back in the 60s. But I don't think we realized the effect it's going to have. And somebody can do their own thing, but guess what? It's going to infiltrate our whole society, our community, what we think, how we act in life. So like you said before, God is going to separate the goat from the sheep, and we are going to have to live in this kind of society without that support, and we're going to have to be set apart from the way the world is today.
Yeah, my first question is, what do you do having your kids in public school?
Right,
I said, you need to understand, when people say, well, I want public school, well, you have to talk about, is it PS6 from the 60s or PS7 or PS8?
Right.
Those are all different beasts.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, you're right.
And so if you keep sending your kids to secular atheist seminaries, you will continue to get secular atheists out.
Right.
And that will account for the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I thank God that my grandchildren are being homeschooled. So I thank God that we had the opportunity to do that. But there are people out there that maybe can't do it. They can't afford Christian schooling. They have to go to work or whatever. I believe that if you really pray, I could be wrong, and do the things that God wants us to do, that He'll make a way and make the provisions for. He did for us, so we thank God for that. But anyway, I think we are in a spiritual mess, The LGBT agenda and gay marriages are now being fully accepted by many denominations and pastors. That's the problem. Because now if we're set apart, we go to our churches to get encouragement, to get uplifted, to hear the word of God, to fellowship, to be arm in arm against these things. That's no longer happening because guess what? Some pastors are even supporting it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, they did that during the Third Reich, too. 80% of the pastors supported Adolf Hitler in Nazi Germany.
That's scary.
That doesn't affect how you and I are supposed to behave and believe.
No.
Okay. And all I'm saying is there may be a consequence to behaving and believing that way. Remember in the end times, it says that when it talks about the martyrs under the altar that have been killed, they're killed for two things. One is the word of their testimony.
That's right.
And the second is the word of God, meaning the veracity of the word of God in the midst of everything else. This is not a time for pessimism. This is the most important thing. I get more and more energized now than I ever used to because one person helping another person in this time, even to come to truth, will be an important thing. As things get dicier, even for those people who don't have the same moral system, they're going to be looking for answers. You look at what's happening in, say, for example, in the Islamic world right now, and there are Muslims who are moderate Muslims looking at the horrors that ISIS is doing in the name of Islam, and they're turning to Christianity.
Yes, I did hear that.
So you have to have answers for that.
Yeah, there was a huge, as a matter of fact, we had Bill Salas on the program, and he was talking about the revival that's happening over in Iran right now amongst the people because of the trials that they've been going through. So, I mean, we'll have pockets of revival then, but you're right. You're absolutely right. It's time for us to check ourselves. Where do we stand? Get ready, because we are definitely living in end times. So how do we get ready? Read your word, and
a lot of times when I talk to men's groups, I say to them, I start out by saying, tell me, everybody, what is it going to take you to spit in the face of Christ? Okay, how much will it take you to cross that line? And by the way, do you know where your line is?
That's a good one.
Because the moment that it comes, it will usually come very rapidly and very unexpectedly.
Yes.
And if you don't know where you're going to stand now, you won't stand when it comes upon you. So you have to understand it involves standing. But remember, everything that you're taught in public school is to engage in consensus thinking, to go along with the crowd, to develop a consensus and to dialogue, not to stand out as individuals. Being an individual is anathema to the thought system of the public school systems.
Yeah, it is. And especially I think we're coming out of the postmodern thought right now, but postmodernism is really saying your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. Let's just all get along, put our views aside, or our doctrines. In the church, actually, they're saying let's put our doctrines aside, let's all get along under the banner of love and unity and peace, by the way. So, we're coming into a time right now where we have to know, the mindset of our culture. We have to know what's going on. It's good to hear these type of shows, and dig into, listen to the warners that are being risen up right now, the watchmen, and dig into your word, and don't depend on a pastor teaching you, but get before the Lord. John, what does it look like for someone to get ready in times like this?
Oh, get ready how? Spiritually is one thing.
I think
knowing what God's Word says, but also understanding what our brothers and sisters in other countries and other times and places have gone through when there was a conflict between church and state. So that if you understand what they did then and what they did right and what they did wrong, then that's a plus. You'll understand what territory. Nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Understand that.
Well, give us
financially.
Yeah.
There are things that you could do, and I'm sure you've had guests on talking about that.
Right.
And you should be ready for times we may have interruptions. There's conceivable. What would happen if we got hit with an EMP strike or something? We'd have interruptions of power and other source of energy as well as goods and services. So are you prepared to at least get through that for a little while? And the more inside cities people get, the less they are likely to do it. It's very strange.
Yeah, well, they just seem like they have their stores right next to them. There's the people in the rural areas that have to travel a little bit to go to the store, so they stock up to begin with anyway.
Yeah, my friends and relatives in California. Now, California has a fun thing called earthquakes, right?
Yeah,
And when we're down there visiting, because, that's where a lot of my family migrated to from New Jersey, they'll say, well, what are we going to have for dinner? Let's run over to the store. Now, where I live, we have a pantry.
That's right.
Because there have been times in the history of where I live in North Idaho that you haven't been able to get into town for a couple of weeks because the snow is so bad.
That's right.
Now, that's okay. We just go to the pantry and say, okay, let's take some soup here and some beans there, and we'll eat tonight,
Yeah.
So that's the time. I asked friends of mine, there's a pastor friend of mine in Miami, Florida, and I said, please tell me. His name is Jesus, Jesus.
Yes.
I said, Jesus, please tell me. Why is it everybody in Miami waits until the weather service says there's a hurricane on the way to run over and get gasoline and water? Please explain this to me.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and yet it's the preppers now that everybody's looking down upon. So we have to have that balance. Not to go maybe too crazy, but just to especially if you have grandchildren or children, there's nothing wrong with number one getting ready physically. Having a little water, having a little...
Listen, Dr. Paul Williams put together a book and a checkbook workbook that you can go down checklist, and it's called When All Plans Fail. So you don't have to think, you don't have to read a lot. All you have to do is go down these checklists and make sure you've done these things. Okay. And he has it at whenallplansfail.com. Actually, we have it here, too, at our website, steelonsteel.com.
All right, well, just give us that information again.
Yeah, it's When All Plans Fail. Dr. Paul Williams. You can go to our website, steelonsteel.com. If you want to subscribe to the show, use the promo code SOS50, SOS50.
We'll be right back, so please stay tuned for our conclusion.
You're listening to Love for the Truth Radio. We'll be right back, so please stay tuned.
I want to personally thank you for listening to Love for the Truth Radio. Please visit our website at www.loveforthetruthradio.com. That's www.loveforthetruthradio.com. Well, we've had a wonderful conversation with John Loeffler, host of Steel on Steel. John, give us last-minute advice. Again, I know you gave us a lot in the last segment, but just to wrap things up, Christians are listening. They're saying, okay, we heard a lot here. We know there's a lot going on. Which way do we turn? What do we do?
It was interesting. You mentioned Pope Francis. And St. Teresa of Avila, wrote a very short poem one time. She said, let nothing disturb you. Let nothing frighten you. Everything is passing. God alone remains. And she ultimately says, he who has God has everything. So civilizations all the way back to the time of Augustine and Constantine have gone through these radical changes, but God's work in the kingdom goes on, and if you ask him, he will give you the insight and the courage and the strength and whatever you need to make it through for your situation and those who are around you. This is never a time to be fearful. It's a time to be courageous, and I believe the new leaders in the church as well will be far different from the leaders that we see now. They have to have a whole different mindset.
That's right.
But always look to God and then do what needs to be done.
That's right. Yeah, and and not to be in fear, but be fear of the Lord, because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And I don't mean fear being afraid of the Lord, but fear meaning have awesome reverence for him, run to him first. John, how can we get in touch with you?
Well, if people would like to try a free subscription to our show for a while, go to steelonsteel.com, just like the metal, steelonsteel.com. Use the promo code SOS50 to sign up, and they'll have a chance to listen to our shows for a while without paying anything for it.
That's awesome. Okay, great. And how about your site that you have up for the persecuted Christians?
We have a Facebook page. I think we were the first ones out there, called Praying for Persecuted Christians. If you search that page, we keep regular stories up there every single day that you can pray for Christians and in some cases help. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, thanks, John, so much for your wealth of information. It gives us a little bit of insight of what's coming down on the pike. At least I think we need to get ready physically, mentally, and spiritually. So thank you, listeners, for listening once again to Love for the Truth Radio. I'm Cindy Hartline, your host. We'll look forward to talking next week with you. So have a great week.